My name is Brian Silva, and I'm the Vice President of Outreach and Engagement here at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I'm very excited to have you all here tonight to be able to talk about what happened yesterday. We've got some amazing panelists here as well, and we'll be getting to them in just a moment. So tonight's virtual town hall is organized by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. For 75 years, Americans United, or AU, has been a nonpartisan educational and advocacy organization dedicated to advancing the separation of religion and government as the only way to ensure freedom of religion, including the right to believe or not believe for all. I'd like to thank and give a shout out to our co-sponsors tonight, the Center for Reproductive Rights, Shiro, and Faith in Women. A couple of housekeeping pieces before we move forward. Again, very happy to have you in attendance. Please note, if you are here as a member of the media, you are very welcome to stay, but this town hall is off the record. Everyone's audio is muted and video is off. You can use the chat feature, but we prefer that you use the Q&A function in Zoom at any time to ask questions. It'll just be easier for us to track that and not miss it. You'll just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and it'll prompt you to ask your questions. We'll try to get to all of them during or at the end of the panel discussion. And just a reminder, this session is being recorded and a link will be sent to all RSVPs tomorrow. At this point, I'd like to introduce and turn it over to your moderator tonight, Alicia Johnson. Alicia is the national organizer and student network manager here at AU, where she manages, among many other things, our marquee youth fellowship program. In addition, she serves on the board of directors of the New York Abortion Access Fund and previously worked for Planned Parenthood of Massachusetts. Alicia, take it away.
Thanks so much, Brian, and good evening, everybody. As Brian said, I'm Alicia Johnson. My pronouns are she, her. And I've not only been working with Americans United for 2 years, actually literally 2 years today, but also working on abortion access for over a decade. So this issue is one that's really close to my heart. And to be honest, the past day, 36 hours or so, it's been pretty hard, especially for folks who have had abortions or seeking abortions, for those who are working on the front lines. And so I'm really grateful that you all are here tonight. We've got almost 100 folks who have joined, are listening in to hear from a great panel about this case, about what's at stake and where we go from here. And we know you're here with us because you know abortion is essential. And yesterday, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. Now, this case is, without exaggeration, the most consequential abortion rights case in decades. It's the first time in 50 years that the court has agreed to hear a case on the constitutionality of a pre-viability abortion ban. And yesterday, during oral arguments, the state of Mississippi explicitly asked the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. If the court does overturn Roe, about half the states in the US are poised to ban abortion entirely. At Americans United, we know that religious freedom is reproductive freedom. And we were one of more than 420 organizations and nearly 10,000 individuals who filed amicus briefs in support of abortion access in this case. The Mississippi law, a 15-week abortion ban, is like many abortion bans that we've seen across the country, including in Texas earlier this year. And they're all part of this larger Christian nationalist agenda that's designed to impose one narrow set of religious beliefs on everybody else. Yesterday, Justice Sotomayor actually got to the heart of this issue. She asked the Mississippi Solicitor General, how is your interest anything but a religious view, right? These religious extremists are trying to impose their beliefs on all of us. But true freedom and equality for all requires church-state separation, so that all of us are free to live as ourselves, to believe as we choose, and that includes making our own decisions about reproductive health care. So the Dobbs case is about religious freedom, it's about abortion access, and it's also about economic justice, and it's about racial justice, because we know that these bans and restrictions on abortion disproportionately harm Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. LGBTQI folks, immigrants, young people, people who are working to make ends meet, people with disabilities. And unfortunately, that's true regardless of the outcome of this case. To ensure true freedom for all, we need a world where abortion isn't just legal, it's accessible, it's affordable, it's supported by our communities. So I'm really grateful to be here with you all tonight to talk about what that means, what is happening right now with this case, what does the future hold, how are we going to ensure abortion access for all? We've got folks from across the country here tonight, which is amazing. We're going to learn more about yesterday's arguments and what comes next with panelists from the Center for Reproductive Rights and Shiro, Mississippi. So let's introduce and bring on those panelists. First, we have Alice Wang. Her pronouns are she, her, and she's the staff attorney at the Center for Reproductive Rights, where she's part of the team litigating Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization before the Supreme Court. Prior to joining the center in 2019, Alice represented 4 parents charged with neglect and abuse as a family defense attorney at Brooklyn Defender Services. We also have Michelle Colon. Her pronouns are she, her, and she's a lifelong grassroots social justice activist, organizer, and proud abortion freedom fighter. She's the executive director and co-founder of Shiro, Sisters Helping Every Woman Rise and Organize, a Black women's collective working to help Black women and girls, regardless of gender identity, preference, or sexual orientation, find their path to liberation through a holistic approach that dismantles oppressive patriarchy by achieving full inclusion, leadership, and equality through community organizing. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here. I'm going to start by asking some questions of our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. And I'll turn to Alice first. So let's start with the background. What brought us up to yesterday? You're part of the team representing Jackson Women's Health Organization, the only abortion clinic in Mississippi. Give us a brief rundown. How did this start with the Mississippi law being passed? How did that bring us to the Supreme Court on Wednesday?
Thanks so much, Alicia, for teeing this up so well. And huge thank you to Americans United for hosting this town hall, and to everyone for taking the time to attend and for paying close attention to this consequential case. Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization involves a challenge to Mississippi's ban on abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. And as Alicia mentioned, it's the first time in a generation that the court has heard a direct request to overturn Roe v. Wade. So just to take a step back and provide a little bit of context, after the Supreme Court's composition shifted in 2018 with Justice Kennedy's retirement, Mississippi was one of a number of states that passed bans on abortion prior to viability. So the Mississippi legislature passed the 15-week ban back in 2018. We immediately filed a lawsuit challenging the ban on behalf of Jackson Women's Health Organization, or JHU for short. As Alicia mentioned, it's the last abortion clinic remaining in Mississippi. So we succeeded in getting the ban blocked before it could take effect, and then the district court later struck down the ban, and that ruling was affirmed by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is one of the most conservative federal courts in the country. So instead of stopping there, Mississippi sought Supreme Court review back in June 2020. And at that point, Mississippi argued that the court should uphold its ban under existing Supreme Court precedent. But after the court agreed to take up the case this year, Mississippi changed course, and it argued in its merits brief, as well as at oral argument yesterday, that the court should overrule almost 50 years of precedent and eliminate the constitutional right to abortion. So it's frankly impossible to overstate how much is at stake in this case. As Alicia mentioned, if the court accepts Mississippi's radical invitation to overturn Roe, almost half the states in the nation are poised to ban abortion. And we don't have to do any guesswork about what the consequences would be, because we're already getting a chilling glimpse of what a post-Roe reality would look like in Texas, where SB 8 has effectively banned abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy for the last 3 months. And I can tell you that the impact for people on the ground has been absolutely devastating. those who can afford to travel are being forced to travel hundreds or even thousands of miles across multiple state lines to access abortion care, while those who have limited means are left with the options of either attempting to terminate their own pregnancy without medical supervision or being forced to carry their pregnancies to term against their wishes. So there's a whole lot on the line in this case, namely pregnant people's basic freedom to control their own bodies and their own lives.
Yeah, thank you. And we're going to return to the arguments that happened yesterday in a bit. But first, I'm going to turn to Michelle. As the founder of Shiro, can you tell us a little bit about how your organization and other activists in Mississippi have responded to this ban and really what's at stake for people in Mississippi in this case?
Well, I think Alice did a wonderful job describing and kind of setting up the scenario about what's at stake. There's only one clinic in Mississippi, and there has been now since I think 2004, 2005. So Mississippi has already been functioning in a post-Roe-ish world for some time now. And even though we have one clinic, when you only have one facility that's providing abortions or providing essential health care, and people have to drive 100 miles or more to get there, that's still considered an abortion desert. So what Shiro is doing and what we have been doing, we have been preparing for this for some time now. I knew this was coming, after the election in 2016. It was what it was. So what we've been doing is we've been having conversations and trainings with, people from all over Mississippi, starting with communities of color, Black and Brown communities, intergenerational conversations with folks, educating them about, first and foremost, why this is so important. It has nothing to do with, regardless of whether you believe in it, but why this is important, period, under a reproductive justice lens, right? And so we're letting people know, don't get wrapped up in the whole God stuff about it, that, anti-abortion laws are designated to hurt people, who are working to make ends meet in Mississippi. We're always the last on something, something good, and we're always number one on something bad. We have the highest Black maternal mortality rate here. And so, and Black and Brown babies are born at lower birth weights than white babies. So, we combat that whole, well, what about being, pro-life? That's not pro-life, that's being pro-birth. So what Shiro has been doing, continuing, having trainings. We're training people on how to take emergency contraception, and we're also distributing it, And we're also having conversations about self-managed abortion. We're working diligently with other activists and organizers in other states, those states that will remain abortion safe states. That's my term. And also, working with several of the local abortion funds. And that's really, really important as far as, supporting abortion funds, because they're going to be the ones that are going to have to help individuals get to abortion providers, because the entire South and Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Ohio will be, they'll be abortion-free states, as we say. And so those folks are going to have to travel longer distances. They're going to have to stay away from their families, away from their jobs. They're going to have to, use more money for gas. And their procedures are most likely going to be, a little bit higher, because we know that the farther along in someone's pregnancy, the propensity of complications increase, even though we know that complications with abortion are very slim to none. But I do recognize that. And so, yeah, those are the challenges. And for women in Mississippi, people in Mississippi, they've already been having those challenges, right? Because with one clinic, they don't feel safe in going to the one clinic for fear of seeing someone, running into someone from their hometown, from their community, from their church. And so they're already going, to other clinics. And this is an undue burden. This is an undue burden on them here in Mississippi, and it's an undue burden on our sister states, who also have, while they may have more than one clinic, but, they're having to deal, in service their own patients. Now they have to take on the burden of our patients as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Alice, for like laying out this context. Definitely, it's true that right now there is such inequity in abortion access between states that many people are living, as you said, in what is almost a post-Roe world because so few clinics exist in states like Mississippi. Mississippi is not the only state with just one clinic. Other abortion restrictions prevent people from being able to afford it. Stigma keeps people from being able to talk about it. And access the care they need. And abortion safe states, as you described, are and may increasingly be places that people travel to get access to abortion. So bringing us to the arguments yesterday in this case, Alice, can you tell us about a little more in detail about what is the case that the Center for Reproductive Rights made to the court? What was the case that Mississippi argued? What did those arguments look like?
Yeah, sure. So after the court agreed to take this case, Mississippi basically began to say the quiet part out loud, and it has repeatedly argued both in its merits brief as well as the oral argument yesterday that Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey are egregiously wrong and that the court should overrule those landmark precedents. So in our arguments, we focus on two primary principles, the first being the importance of the right to abortion for women's autonomy and equal participation in the economic and social life of the nation. And the second is, of course, stare decisis, which is the legal principle that the court should not overrule its own precedents without special justification. So in this case, we not only have Roe's precedent on the question of whether the Constitution protects a right to abortion, but we also have Casey's precedent on the question of whether to overturn Roe. And in Casey, the Supreme Court has already considered and rejected all of the very same arguments that Mississippi made here. And nothing has changed over the last 3 decades since Casey to justify reaching a different conclusion now. So those are the primary principles that were lifted up by our litigation director, Julie Rickleman, as well as the United States Solicitor General, Elizabeth Prelogger, who came in on our side. And in addition, they also highlighted the real world harms that would unfold if the court overturns Roe and takes away the fundamental right to abortion that millions of Americans have relied upon. It's important to keep in mind that over the last 50 years since Roe was decided, 2 generations of people have come of age relying on the promise that should they become pregnant, the decision whether to continue or terminate that pregnancy is theirs and not the government's to make.
Thank you. And Michelle, did you have any sort of reflections or responses to what you heard or saw about the arguments yesterday?
Well, while I'm a bit biased, I do admit that I expected more from the state since they had switched, attorneys or some, brought in this new this new attorney, right? I mean, because he was touted with all this experience and everything, and it was a little underwhelming for me. I thought Julie, and I've seen Julie in action in person. I thought Julie did an extremely great job. I did not, however, I'll be honest, listen to the entire oral arguments because in Mississippi, we had 3 events yesterday. And so, but I did get a chance to hear her handle, and I say this, handle Chief Justice Roberts, Justices Thomas, Alito, and Comey Barrett. I mean, and Kavanaugh. So I'm not worried. I wasn't worried about Julie not being able to do the job and deliver, and very proud of her and grateful to her and the Center for Reproductive Rights for always being there for the last clinic in Mississippi.
Yeah, absolutely. It was incredible to listen to her in the arguments yesterday, and it was 2 hours of arguments. It was a long listen, and a tough listen at times too. To hear some of the justices hear some of the justices and what they had to say about abortion access and about bodily autonomy. And actually, one of the things that I noticed of the Mississippi Solicitor General's arguments, he repeatedly said to the court that the court should return the question of abortion to the people. He kept saying that. And it was very frustrating because what he seemed to mean by that was the legislators of Mississippi, or the legislators of states, particularly conservative states that want to ban abortion. And so, Michelle, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about what the people of Mississippi actually want and need when it comes to abortion access, because certainly at the national level, we know that the vast majority of Americans believe abortion should be a legal right.
So you're absolutely right. He's referring to the white racist patriarchy that's in the Capitol that sits on High Street in Jackson, Mississippi. The real people, the people who this is going to affect, they voted 10 years ago, 58% against a personhood amendment where everyone thought it was going to pass here. Now, while that amendment was called personhood, all of us knew what the intent was. That was to close down the last clinic in Mississippi. If you were to poll today, we would probably get pretty much the same percentage, possibly even more. So they're not listening to the voters. They're not listening to us. They never have. And so, we need to be clear in sending a clear message to all politicians in all states that, keeping abortion legal, especially in Mississippi and across the nation, is necessary and important. You have a lot of people now, the language is shifting. And another one of the things that Shira does is that we're working on destigmatizing, anything and everything around abortion. Say the word abortion. Let's get away from saying pro-choice. Say the word abortion. The anti say it all the time. So you should be comfortable in hearing it and you should be comfortable in saying it. And so a lot of people may say it's not something that they would do, but they don't want to restrict that access to anyone else. And so when I hear that, that's a point for our side. So he's wrong, and when he says the people, he's only talking about the people who unfortunately are the people who make the laws. They are the law, the people who make the laws. And the reason why they're in power is because another constitutional right that they're attacking is voting rights. So you have these states that are, they're going hand in hand. They're attacking, abortion rights and voting rights to keep themselves in power so they can continue oppressing folks. So I just want people to remember that the abortion fight and the voting rights fight are hand in hand, and they're very much parallel and important for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of one of, again, Justice Sotomayor, who spoke up a lot for people seeking abortions during the arguments and her lines of questioning. Some of what she asked about pointed to broader implications. So even beyond Roe and Casey, that if those precedents are overturned, she asked, what are the implications for other cases like Obergefell, which established marriage equality a few years back? Alice, I wonder if you have any sort of thoughts or insights into that line of questioning. What are the potential broader implications for the ultimate decision in this case?
Thanks, Alicia. So as you say, this line of questioning from Justice Sotomayor recognizes that more than abortion is at stake if Roe is overturned. Roe and Casey are load-bearing elements in the scaffolding of interrelated cases like Obergefell, which you mentioned, as well as Griswold, which established the right to use contraception, and Lawrence, which established the right to engage in consensual intimate conduct without unnecessary government interference. So contrary to Mississippi's arguments, overturning Roe and Casey would absolutely weaken these other constitutional rights that are related to bodily integrity, as well as autonomy in personal decisions concerning matters of family, child rearing and marriage. In fact, the architect of Texas SB 8, Jonathan Mitchell, he kind of said the quiet part out loud when he submitted an amicus brief in support of Mississippi that argued that in addition to Roe, Obergefell and Lawrence were also wrongly decided.
Yeah, thank you for that context. And I feel like there's also some larger sort of trends at play here in like the law around abortion. We've referenced Texas and SB 8 here. Could you, for those who might not have been as in the weeds on that, just quickly explain SB 8 and sort of what are other kind of larger trends that we see in abortion legislation or in the courts across the country?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. So SB 8 is a law that bans abortion upon detection of embryonic cardiac activity, which is approximately around 6 weeks of pregnancy. Now, what sets it apart from the run-of-the-mill abortion ban, those that have been uniformly enjoined by the other federal courts, is that instead of being enforced by the state of Texas, it delegates enforcement to private individuals by setting a $10,000 bounty to incentivize everyday people to sue not only abortion providers, but anyone who aids or abets an abortion performed after 6 weeks. So SB 8 has been in effect for the last 3 months. And as I mentioned earlier, the impacts have been absolutely devastating. As for the broader context of why all of this is happening and where these bans fit into the broader picture, ever since Roe was decided almost 50 years ago, anti-abortion politicians have continued to enact abortion restrictions that are designed to push abortion out of reach, even when it has been legal on the books. So this has been a record year with more than 100 new bans and restrictions on abortion. And those include laws that single out abortion providers for onerous, medically unnecessary restrictions. And it also includes laws that impose barriers that make it really difficult for people to access abortion and force them to jump through ever higher hoops. So even with Roe on the books, those barriers have already made it almost impossible as a practical matter for a large swath of this country to actually access abortion, especially in the South and Midwest, and especially for people with limited means who are disproportionately Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as undocumented people, young people, and people who live in rural communities. So as you and Michelle were both pointing out, Roe is the floor, it's not the ceiling, but even this bare minimum is at graver threat than it has been in several decades.
Yeah, and we don't have to always look for the good, but there are states that are working to expand access at the same time. It's not okay. We should not have a state-by-state decision of whether people have bodily autonomy and are able to access abortion. But we certainly do in a lot of ways right now. We may have more so based on the decision of this case. In some states like where I'm on the New York Abortion Access Fund board, we have folks who are working to expand access, which is a bit of relief in light of all of this. And we also have, you know, while so much feels and is in a lot of ways dire and not okay, we know that, as I said, the majority of people support abortion. And while the arguments were happening yesterday, I was at the Supreme Court steps. There were thousands of people out there rallying for abortion access, saying this is not okay, demanding abortion access for all. I know, Michelle, you were rallying in Mississippi, holding a lot of events there. Can you tell us about sort of the events you hosted yesterday and sort of what it looks like? You know, you've talked about this earlier, but just in light of what legislators are trying to do against the will of the people, right? What it looks like to continue to advocate for abortion access in Mississippi.
Sure. So first off, Shiro, along with the Mississippi Abortion Access Coalition, we had a Abortion Freedom Fighters Day of Action, where we had 3 events. We hosted a, by invitation only, oral arguments, watch breakfast gathering with folks from Mississippi, and we had activists and organizers from Texas and Louisiana join us, because I asked for people, you know, for activists, like, don't go to DC, come to Mississippi. Our community needed this support, right? You know, everyone always flocks to DC, and I'm like, I'm not going to DC. I'm going to stay right here in Jackson and, you know, continue showing my support. And I wanted to not only show my support, but also show and voice my opposition to the governor and our attorney general. So then we had a rally, which was fabulous. It was called the Abortion Freedom Fighters Rally. And then later on in the evening, we hosted a intimate abortion storytelling reception. So, you know, we gave space to those individuals who wanted to share their stories, because again, we're working to destigmatize abortion and, you know, all of the drama and the lies. So that's what we did. And to answer your second part of your question, as far as dealing with this here in Mississippi and moving forward, this is what I'm going to say. Regardless of the outcome of the Dobbs case, Shiro and myself will always do what it takes and what is needed to ensure that people can get abortion care, you know, the safe abortion care that they need, whether that means, you know, going to another clinic, you know, again, assisting with self-managing abortions, their abortions, you know, and also, you know, funding their abortions, working, you know, diligently with several of the abortion funds, because we believe that anyone who decides to end a pregnancy should be able to choose for themselves. The Supreme Court doesn't decide our destinies. The governor of Mississippi doesn't decide our destinies, and neither does the attorney general here. We decide our destinies.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we're about to turn to some audience questions. I know we're getting a ton, so we will try to get to as many as we can. But I really wanted to make sure that we really spoke to the importance of remembering that no matter what the outcome of this case is, that local advocacy and organizing is so important, that this work is happening. It will continue to happen with orgs like Shiro. And that's really important, even as we get into the weeds about what is the case, what's gonna happen, what can the decision look like? And so Brian is gonna rejoin us now. He's been looking at folks' questions. Brian, what should we talk about next? What are folks wondering about? You're muted.
You'd think after so many months of Zooming that we wouldn't do that, but yeah, we have a ton of questions. We'll do our best to get to as many as they can. First question, is there a chance, worst case scenario, that the Supreme Court could eventually find a right to fetal life in the Constitution and ban abortion even in states where abortion rights have stronger protections?
Sure, I'm happy to take this question. So that possibility was not directly at issue in this case. And in fact, Justice Kavanaugh posed this question to the Mississippi Solicitor General, Scott Stewart, yesterday, asking, you're not advocating for us to hold that there can be a blanket ban on abortion across the country. You're just asking to return this to the people, AKA the state legislators. But the anti-abortion movement is definitely pushing for fetal personhood as their broader goal. In fact, many of Mississippi's amici did make that argument in support of Mississippi. They will not stop fighting until they have tried to achieve that. So even though it's not an issue in this case, we shouldn't let them pull the wool over our eyes when they say that they're trying to let each state decide for themselves, because what they're actually trying to do is establish fetal personhood under the Constitution, such that it would completely deprive half of the population, all people who are capable of becoming pregnant, of their rights to bodily integrity and personal autonomy.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is that about the argument that an adverse decision in this case could undercut other related decisions or other precedents. We talked about same-sex marriage being one of them. And the question was, is that a dangerous concession to make, to kind of put that idea in the court's mind, or is it more effective, we think, is like a red flag, like careful what you think that you're about to do, and who do you think that was maybe meant to persuade?
That's a good question. I'm not really in a position to comment on, specific questions from the justices. Yeah, I mean, I think that reasonable minds can differ on whether it's good strategy, whether it counts as a concession, but the reality is that these rights are indeed interrelated. In Casey, the court found that the right to abortion is grounded in two lines of cases, one that protects basic rights to bodily integrity, and another line of cases that protects our right to make basic decisions about our families, about child rearing, about marriage. So if we do overrule or gut Roe, then that will erode the foundations to all of these cases under the substantive due process clause.
Great, and just kind of a follow-up to that, one of our folks mentioned that Justice Kavanaugh listed many older SCOTUS decisions that have overturned precedents like Brown and Obergefell, and that many of those cases were ultimately decided in a way that expanded rights, whereas this precedent would restrict or roll back rights. Was wondering if you knew if any of the amicus briefs or any of the arguments pointed that out, or that's just been more kind of analysis afterwards. And we will remind folks that even if things weren't pointed out in the court session, the court does read the news and does listen to what's going on in the news. So even things that weren't necessarily made in court doesn't mean that the justices won't hear them and potentially take that into consideration, which is why we have the rallies and other pieces. But back to that question, kind of extending into what we were talking about.
Yeah, so first I would say that General Prelogger did make that argument very forcefully. She really emphasized that the court has literally never rescinded a constitutional right, much less one on this magnitude that so many people have relied upon. And she did distinguish that litany of cases that Justice Kavanaugh mentioned on the basis that those were all cases that an overruling precedent expanded individual liberties rather than constricting them, and that is a significant difference. And I think you're absolutely right, Brian, that the court looks at much more than what comes out during oral argument as well. In this case, there were over 50 amicus briefs that were submitted in support of Jackson Women's Health Organization, and some of them did indeed make the point that the court should not take lightly an invitation to rescind a constitutional right.
Great, thank you. Michelle, we had a question from someone asking if, I think it was you, I apologize if not, if you could explain what self-managing abortion is, what just a little more explanation of what that term means. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go, I apologize. So what we mean by self-managing abortions, that means that an individual doesn't necessarily have to go to a clinic to have their abortions, right? And so have their abortions or have to go and get their medication, or get the medication that they need to get for the medication abortions. And first of all, I like to say that if we lose, if Roe is overturned, abortions can still be safe. Right? If they become illegal, they can still be safe. And that's the reason why Shiro is having these conversations about self-managed abortion. So what that means is that, individuals, pregnant people who want to terminate their pregnancies should be allowed to do that in whatever environment that they want to do. They don't necessarily have to go to a clinic. If they can get the medication, they can, instead of going to the doctor's office to get the medication, they should be allowed to go pick up the prescription at their local pharmacy and be able to do this in whatever environment that they choose, whether it's in their homes, or surrounded by the people that they choose to be their support people, and just kind of, create that environment where it's safe for them. You don't necessarily have to go to a clinic. They can do it on their own terms. Unfortunately, Mississippi does not allow telemedicine in regards to abortion. We have it for, several other type of medical care access. But of course, years ago, they created a law where, again, to make it more difficult for people to obtain abortions here in the state. I hope that pretty much answers the question. And the other thing about SMA is that, it provides, like I said, it provides a new possibility for care, right? Because, you don't have to go, you don't have to travel to a clinic. You could do this at home or wherever you want, or a friend's house or what have you.
Great, thank you. We had a kind of piggybacking off of that. One of our participants said that to mention that today a Texas law went into effect banning women from requesting or being prescribed prescription pills for self-managed abortions after 7 weeks, and further banned sending these drugs in the mail to patients. So, obviously they are continuing to try to find ways to get around everything that folks are trying to do to empower women and bodily autonomy. Another comment, is the Texas law going to be reviewed further by the Supreme Court? Yes, it has, and I believe, Alice, it's an expedited review, but the law is in effect until the court does review it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the court heard oral argument on November 1st in two cases against Texas SB 8. There's like the providers case as well as the United States case. And what's at issue in those cases isn't the merits of SB 8's ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Instead, it's the threshold procedural issue of whether federal courts have the authority to block Texas's SB 8 in light of its unusual enforcement scheme where it delegates enforcement to private actors. So it's extremely alarming that the court has yet to issue its decision. It's been a month since the oral argument. SB 8 has been in effect for 3 months, with Texans being irreparably harmed. It seems that they're really failing to understand the gravity of the harm that's occurring.
Great, thank you. I know we touched on it a little bit, but quite a few folks have asked about it, and I think it's something that has been in the news quite a bit from there is Justice Sotomayor's comment about, I'm paraphrasing here, can the court overcome the stench that would fall upon it if they overturned a precedent like this? I think referring to how long it's been in effect and people's expectation that that constitutional right would be there, and wanted to ask the panelists, they wanted the panelists to just comment on how that decision might hurt, the court's legitimacy, or any other comments or thoughts on that. And here, one of our folks said, will this institution survive the stench that this creates in the public perception that the Constitution and its reading are just political acts? So thank you for that. I'll let everybody that wants to comment go ahead.
I'm not a legal scholar, so if I just like to go first because I know Alice will bring a whole other, understanding and brilliance to this question. I don't think this current court really gives a damn about, what's going to come afterward. They have been very adamant in their attitudes toward abortion and overturning Roe v. Wade. And this is the reason why, me personally, I don't feel like Roe is going to be saved. I think, we've always heard in the past about the activist judge. And if there ever wasn't a time where we have activist judges, we have them now. These justices, especially the last three, were picked specifically to be on this court for this particular reason. This was the strategy. So I don't feel that they really care about the integrity of the United States Supreme Court anymore, nor do they care about the legacy or how this is going to affect people in this country in general.
Michelle, for a non-lawyer, I have to say that is some pretty rigorous legal analysis. And I couldn't have said it better than Justice Sotomayor herself. The center is a litigating organization. We can't really comment so much on the individual comments that the justices made. But I think that Julie Rickleman made it quite clear at oral argument yesterday that if the rule of law means anything at all, then the only principled outcome is for the court to strike down Mississippi's ban.
Great, thank you. This question is specifically for us here at AU, and I'll try to give it an answer, but asking about, while in most cases, strong anti-abortion views are informed by religious views, I've debated many anti-abortion activists who claim to be atheists. The need to protect abortion rights is critical, but what exactly is AU's on-ramp onto this issue? Must an abortion ban be a violation of separation between church and state? What if abortion is banned for secular reasons? And I think the important answer for that is, because so many people have different views, whether you're atheist, agnostic, humanist, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever your belief system is, restricting or banning abortion is imposing only one set of religious beliefs, whether they're based secularly or religiously, onto an entire country and enshrining that into law. And the overwhelming majority, beyond people's opposition to abortion is based on their religious beliefs. So the only way to allow people whose beliefs tell them that they should not have an abortion or that abortion is wrong, and to allow people whose religious beliefs say that they can and sometimes even should, especially in the sense of the health of a mother, the only law that allows all of those views to come into play is by having legal abortion. And so I think that for us here at AU is a big part of why this is such an important issue. Again, one, because the 95% of folks who argue against it are basing it on one particular religious set of beliefs, and also because by allowing legal abortion, it does allow everybody the personal choice to follow their own religious beliefs. And that's why this issue is important to us and why we specifically fight for it. Next question, can you explain how the previous court decided that the Constitution protected the right to abortion? So, just a couple of seconds about the history of maybe Roe and Casey, and just another, kind of a little bit of why we think the present court might find differently, just some of the key arguments that came out of there. I know we've talked a little bit about all of that, but I think it is so important, and we have had folks joining in throughout, that it'd be great to just kind of summarize that again.
Sure, happy to do that. So the court first established the constitutional right to abortion in Roe v. Wade almost 50 years ago. And in Casey, 30 years ago, the court was directly asked to overrule Roe, and it conducted a careful stare decisis analysis where it looked at all of the factors that it's required to when being asked to overturn its own precedents. And it found that the justifications offered by the state of Pennsylvania were insufficient to overturn such a watershed precedent. And it retained Roe's central holding that the Constitution protects each and every person's right to obtain an abortion prior to fetal viability. That central holding is what Mississippi is challenging in this case. And Mississippi has gone straight out to argue that the court should overturn Roe and Casey in their entirety and find that there is no constitutional right to abortion. Mississippi has argued that those precedents are egregiously wrong, that they are unworkable, that they have produced tremendous adverse consequences for the court and for this country. And yeah, those are the primary arguments that Mississippi made in its brief, as well as yesterday at oral argument.
Great, thank you. Another question. Oh, okay, we're gonna have one more question. I just got the nod here. Let me just pull this back up, sorry. Just a moment. If the Supreme Court should overrule Roe v. Wade, citing that it was unconstitutional, but allows the state's discretion to allow or disallow abortions, which prevails, federal or state law? Or is there a conflict there, or it really does just go back to each state will be allowed to create its own rules?
Well, if the court does overturn Roe, then that would eliminate federal constitutional protection for the right to abortion. So that would allow state legislators to pass abortion bans and restrictions, and those bans and restrictions could then be upheld in federal court. Now, of course, states are free to protect abortion access independently under their state constitutions and by passing proactive legislation to protect and expand access to abortion. And that can happen on the federal level as well. So we've talked about a lot of alarming things today, but one thing I'm optimistic about is that there is a potential fix to this whack-a-mole situation of states passing more and more abortion restrictions. And Congress can clean up this mess by enacting the Women's Health Protection Act, which would also provide independent statutory protection for abortion access if Roe were to fall. So the Women's Health Protection Act has already passed in the House in a historic vote this September, and now it's up to the Senate to do the same.
So glad that you gave that shout out for the Women's Health Protection Act. Super important legislation for everyone to lobby our senators for, or if you are a DC resident like me, lobby Senate leadership for. And really to continue to speak up, do education, do local state-based advocacy as well, so that we can protect access no matter where folks live and no matter what happens in this case. And I wanted to close with a question for Michelle that in the wake of this case, and no matter what happens, what should national or folks across the country, I should say, our audience here, what should we be doing, be thinking about to support your work, to support abortion access in Mississippi or other states where access is under threat?
I think the first thing that everyone should be doing is send donations to local abortion funds. And if you live in a state where you're privileged, like New York, Massachusetts, and California, where you don't have the same restrictions and obstacles, then please donate to abortion funds that support Mississippians, Texans, folks in Alabama and in the South. Because nothing is sadder than an individual having a pregnant person who wants to terminate their pregnancy, calling the abortion fund, and the abortion fund has to tell them, I'm sorry, but we don't have the funding to assist you. So we need to make sure, first and foremost, that abortion funds in the South are secured with enough funding to help people now and moving forward. The second thing I would say is make sure you are in tune with the local organizers and activists on the ground. Direct your funds there, your donations there, instead of giving it to the parent or the national office in DC, New York, or what have you. Support the local folks on the ground and support the women and people of color, the Black and brown people who have been doing this work for decades. Follow their lead. stay aware and get involved, whether it's, helping transport people, housing them, purchasing gift cards and things like that. And also, send e-cards to providers. They had a rough day yesterday. There was a lot of stuff that went on, whereas, there were some providers whose clinics were, basically attacked in the sense antis were able to get in. Send them e-cards so they can order lunch, whatever it is they need. That's how people can help.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shout out to abortion clinics, folks on the front lines, to abortion funds who are making abortion access a reality every day for people seeking abortion in this country. Even while we await this decision and after it comes out, that work continues. So we are about at time. I know we had even more questions and comments that we couldn't always get to. So we hope that you'll stay in touch with us, the Center for Reproductive Rights, Shiro, Mississippi, and Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I also hope that you'll join us again 1 week from today at our second virtual town hall for the Carson v. Macon case. That case is being argued next Wednesday at the Supreme Court, and it could force the state of Maine to use public money to fund religious education. It's a real landmark case for protecting religious freedom, public education access, and separation of church and state. It's really important, and we will digest it, talk about it like we did tonight next Thursday. If you may have already RSVP'd for it when you signed up for tonight's event, but if not, we'll still send you the RSVP link tomorrow, as well as a recording from tonight. Thank you so much to my fellow panelists, Alice Wang from the Center for Reproductive Rights, Michelle Colon from Shiro. Thank you, Brian, for co-hosting. Thanks to the folks that all joined us to listen and learn and ask your great questions from all over the country. And thank you for being with us in this fight. Good night.